Okay, so we're talking about Samson. The name of the story today is Samson's Sins and God's Mercy. I might have used the word grace, whichever one of those two words. Um, so now Samson had grown up. Remember, he was a Nazarite, so he was supposed to be set aside for God to do wonderful things for God's people and to lead God's people with greatness and love. Um, and because he was a Nazarite, there were three things that he had to do to kind of keep that vow, to keep him set apart for God. Number one, don't touch any dead bodies. Remember the lion and the honey? So Samson purposefully disobeyed that promise, and he scooped honey out of a dead lion on purpose. So he broke that one. He broke another promise too. Remember the second Nazarite vow, part of the Nazarite vow was to never drink alcohol. Now, he threw a big party and drank a lot of alcohol. So he knew that he had promised God that he wasn't going to do that, and then he did it. So he had broken two of the three parts of the vow. Now, if you remember what the third one was, it was never cut his hair. Keep his hair growing. Don't take a razor to his head. So keep it long. And that was just going to show people that he was set aside to do God's work. So God was using Samson, even though we know Samson was a very selfish person. He had a hot temper, but God was still so gracious that he was using Samson to deliver the Israelites from the oppression of the Philistines. The Philistines were harshly ruling over the Israelites, and God wanted to protect the Israelites, not only just physically protect them and to comfort them, but he also wanted to keep their faith strong in him as the true God, because the Philistines worshipped a god named Dagon, Dagon, and they would do things that were very, very, very shameful, things that I would not want to talk about. They would do these things in public to worship their god Dagon. And so the problem was that some of the Israelites were being tempted to go and worship the god of the Philistines rather than the true God, the God who saved them from slavery in Egypt. So Samson was going to be used to do some pretty great things and to rescue the Israelites, even though he had committed some pretty outward public sins. All right, so Samson's a little older now. His wife had gotten burned in her home. So he is a little older now, not very much older, just a little older, and still kind of just living his life, kind of thinking about himself first, not really caring that God set him aside to do some pretty great things for God's people. So he goes to this city called Gaza. Now, Gaza was pretty far away from where Samson lived, and it was where Philistines lived, and they would do some pretty publicly sinful acts in this city. It was very open about the sin that was being committed there, and Samson wanted to be a part of it. So he went to Gaza. He snuck in. He tried to go undercover because they knew who Samson was. They knew he was this powerful guy who had slain a lot of their people. Remember the jawbone, the donkey. Remember the fox's tails and the fire? Yeah, he had done a lot of stuff. So the Philistines were not happy with Samson, and they were out to get him. But they were also afraid because they knew he was so strong. He had just done crazy things, like one guy against who knows how many people. So they were kind of afraid of him. So when they saw him sneak in, it was nighttime. They saw him sneak in, and they saw him go into this building where some sinful things were going on. And they were like, ooh, he's going to stay the night there. So when the city gate closes, which it was closing in 2 minutes, it was nighttime. So when the city gate closes, we're going to wait. And then at dawn, we're going to go right before the city gates open. And then when he goes to leave the city, we're going to attack him, catch him off guard. So they went back home. You know, they weren't worried about hanging out at the city gate because it was this giant, like these doors and gates and, you know, cemented into the foundation. It was nobody was going in, and nobody was going out. So Samson had gone into this building to do his thing, and he decided, oh, I'm not going to stay overnight. I'm just going to leave at midnight. So he left at midnight. But the city gates, right? Like what? Well, he charged the gates, ripped them out of the foundation. So he had these giant doors, like in his, I don't know, like hold them over his back. And he wanted to kind of show off. So he went up a hill. So he charged these gates, grabbed them over his shoulders, went up this hill, and threw them on the hill. And basically he was just showing the Philistines, like, hey, not only did I escape your city, but I ripped up your gates, and none of you guys could do it, and I ran up a hill and dropped them off there. So he got away with it. So the Philistines, they were getting really mad. They were like done with Samson. So they were out to get him. So they found out where he went. He had gone back home. And a little time had passed, and he had met this woman named Delilah. Well, Delilah was very, very pretty. And Samson could have gotten married to her and, you know, been doing God-pleasing things. But instead of marrying her, he acted as though she was his wife and did not marry her. So once again, breaking a command that God had given him and all Christians. So he had fallen in love with Delilah, and Delilah had fallen in love with him. But there was one problem. Delilah loved money more than she loved Samson. And these rulers came, the 5 Philistines rulers came up to Delilah, and they're like, okay, tell us the secret of his strength. If you tell us the secret of his strength, we're going to give you 1,100 shekels each. They wanted to know the secret of his strength so that they could kill him or imprison him, right? And 1,100 shekels, so it's, if each king, 5 kings, if each of them would have given Delilah 1,500 shekels, it would have been like if your parents worked for 15 years and then gave you all that money. Like they didn't spend any of that money. They gave all to you. That's how much these kings were offering Delilah. Delilah was like, oh, yeah, I will definitely tell you the secret of Samson's strength so he can be murdered. If you'll give me that money. So she went to Samson. She's like, Samson. Maybe she called him Sammy. Samson, will you tell me the secret of your strength? And he was like pretty overconfident, not really caring about like God's plan for him, just kind of showing off. So he's like, yeah, I'm going to mess with Delilah. So he told her, yeah, if you get 7 fresh cords. So I think like cords, they were like big, thick, like rope kind of things. He didn't call them ropes. He in a different situation, they call them ropes. So this situation, they call them cords. So I'm not really sure the difference. But he's like, if you get 7 fresh cords and tie me up, I'll lose all my strength, and then they could just kill me. So Delilah, she got a hold of those 5 rulers. She's like, all right, guys, bring me 7 fresh ropes. And they did. And then she's like, hide in the house while I tie up Samson with these 7 fresh cords. Sorry, I said ropes. Cords. While I tie up Samson. So they hid. And she tied Samson up. And then she yelled, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he ripped off the 7 fresh cords like they were no big deal. Like they just were like thin strings that, just broke. But he broke them. And Delilah was very frustrated, very angry. She's like, you told me a lie. You made a fool of me. And so he's like, fine, I'll tell you. Here's the secret of my strength. If you get some brand new ropes, so ones that have never been used, never been used, like not for anything, just brand new ropes. And if you tie me up with those, I'll lose my strength and then anyone could just kill me. So she's like, okay. So she told the Philistine guys, she's like, go get me some new ropes that have never been used and hide in the house. So they gave her the ropes. She tied them up. The Philistine guys were hiding in the house. And she's like, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he believed her. He was like, ah! So he broke free of the ropes. Just like they were like, itty-bitty threads, no big deal. So she's like, Samson, you made a fool of me again. Meanwhile, he doesn't know the Philistine guys are hiding, by the way. So she's like, why don't you just tell me? So, okay, now he tells her the weirdest thing yet. He's like, if you get a loom and you tie my long 7 braids, he had like long braids because his hair had never been cut. If you pin my braids in that loom, well, this loom was like this big thing that they would loom fabric, and you can Google image it. But if you get my 7 braids in that loom and then you pin it, I won't be able to do anything about it. I'll be stuck, and anyone could just kill me. So he fell asleep this time. We know he fell asleep. And she wove his 7 braids into the loom. And then she's like, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. Remember, the guys were hiding in the house. The Philistines are upon you. And he woke up, and he with his hair, he like ripped the loom out of the ground, like off the ground. And he was like, the loom was like on his back, like a backpack. He was like swinging it around, like no big deal. It was this giant loom, and his hair was stuck in it. No problem. And she's like, Samson, you made a fool of me again. So the Philistine rulers are like, okay, it's not going to happen anytime soon. So they leave. Meanwhile, Delilah keeps nagging Samson. She really wants this money. So she nags him every day, all the time, like, tell me, don't you love me? Tell me. So finally, Samson, not caring what the vow meant that he had taken not to cut his hair, but he just told her. And he obviously knew that she was going to do something about it. So he told her, and he was kind of just relying on himself, like that he was just going to be strong no matter what happened. That it didn't really matter. Like God wasn't, I don't know. So he just told her, he's like, well, if you shave my head, if you cut my hair, then I will lose all my strength and I can be killed. Told her. Okay? So Delilah tells the rulers, they come back with their silver, all their shekels to give her, and they hide in the house, and she lulls Samson to sleep. Go to sleep. So he goes to sleep, and she calls out one of the guys, hey, come cut off his hair, come shave his head. So while she's like lulling Samson to sleep, the guy kind of sneaks out, he shaves all of his braids off, cuts his hair, and then Delilah yells, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he wakes up ready to defend himself. And they attack him, and he cannot do anything about it. He's lost all his strength. The Lord left him. All that power that God had allowed Samson to have was gone. Samson completely lost his strength. So the Philistine rulers gouge out his eyes. They literally take his eyeballs out. They gouge them out. So they put him in bronze shackles, and they storm him off. What they do is they imprison him in this mill, where what would happen in a mill is donkeys would be attached to this beam, and they would grind up grain to make it into flour. They would be attached to this beam that was controlling a giant stone that would do the grinding. So instead of having a donkey do it, they took Samson. Samson couldn't see. His eyes were gouged out. They attached him to this beam that was then attached to this stone. And all day long, he had to mill this grain in total darkness because he was blind now. So he was completely miserable. None of his strength was left. He was alone. He was by himself and just stuck imprisoned in this mill, grinding grain. Well, he had a lot of time to think, and I think he was reflecting on his life and seeing how, God had given him this strength. God had set him apart and blessed him. And he just kept disobeying God in so many different ways. He had time to reflect. And during this time where he was alone and miserable, the Philistines were celebrating because they had caught Samson. And a festival was coming up where they were going to offer sacrifices to their god, Dagon, and they were all going to gather at this temple. So they had a plan. So the 5 rulers and like all the other important people all the other important Philistines, and then tons of other people, like thousands of people, came to the temple of Dagon to have a party. And like crazy party. We're talking crazy party. And they're like, oh, we want Samson to entertain us. So they drug Samson out of this mill, and they had him in shackles, and they took him and they had him like perform in front of all these Philistines. Now, we don't know, the Bible doesn't say exactly like what he had to do to perform and entertain them, but some way or other, that's what he's doing. Well, he had this boy who, because he was blind, the boy was like leading him to where he needed to be. And some point during the night, Samson said, hey, will you tie me to the 2 pillars that support the temple? There were these giant pillars that supported the temple. Just tie me up to those, because he was tied up anyway. So he's like, well, put me in between those 2 pillars so I can like lean and rest. So the boy did. He tied him between the 2 pillars, and at that point, so the boy was kind of off. At that point, Samson prayed to God. He said, Sovereign Lord. And by saying God's name like that, he was showing God, I know you are the true God, and I know I have messed up. I know you are almighty, and I am just a miserable sinner. He said, Sovereign Lord, please give me one last oomph of strength so that I can overcome the Philistines, and let me die with the Philistines. My life does not need to be spared. Let me deliver the Israelites from, these people who are hurting them. And God was gracious. God forgave Samson for the sins he had committed, and he gave Samson this one last blast of strength. And so Samson took his arms and he just shoved these 2 pillars apart. And the entire temple, with all these thousands of Philistines and these very important Philistine leaders, it came crumbling down on top of everybody, including Samson. And so Samson died that day, but he died saving the Israelites from the Philistine people. So God blessed him. And we know that since Samson did realize that he had sinned, but he believed that God had forgiven him, and he knew that God was gracious, we know that Samson is in heaven. And that is the story of Samson's sin and God's mercy.